Welcome to Behind the Catch Fence. I'm your host, David Hoffman. We are on to episode 58, which means we're oh so close to 60. Now let's just say you'll be pleasantly surprised of who we have joining over the next few weeks, so make sure to stay tuned and subscribe and everything. Now if you haven't already, make sure to go back and watch some of our latest shows, which features drivers like Donnie Schatz, Joey Logano, Tony Schumacher, Lance DeWeese, and many more. Anyway, in today's show, we have former NASCAR driver and current NBC analyst, Kyle Petty. Now, Petty's a third-generation driver from the illustrious Petty family, which obviously includes the likes of NASCAR Hall of Famers Lee Petty and Richard Petty. Now, on the show, you'll hear Kyle talk about his annual charity ride that's coming up soon, the 75th anniversary of the Petty family in racing, some of the glory days of when he was with SABCO Racing, and much more. So with that, sit back, relax, grab your favorite snack, maybe some Rice Krispie treats for a little something different, a little more sweet vibe today. And enjoy this episode with Kyle Petty.
I'm ready now.
All right, let's do this. Well, hey, thanks for taking the time. Obviously, you got the charity ride, 28th edition of the charity ride across America. I got the hat on as well. Super cool.
Yep.
So yeah, going into it a little bit, you mentioned, I remember the last time we talked last year, just how amazed you were by the fact that you made it over 2 decades now. Just how excited is it to reflect on those years past and, just about the future of it and, and everything else?
You know what? It's funny. This should be our 30th year, if not for COVID. So that just fascinates me in itself. But to think we've been doing it for 28 years, pretty much every year. I jokingly say that, once we got to 25, all the places that we had driven by for the first 25 years, we're going back to the next 25 years. And that's really what we're doing, because like this year's ride, we're going, starting in South Dakota, starting in Deadwood, we're going to Rushmore, coming down and coming through Nebraska. And, we're going to spend some time at the Mississippi River. We're going to Indianapolis. We're going to spend some time at the racetrack. We're going to Churchill Downs. We're going to spend some time there for lunch, to the Corvette Museum and Bowling Green, and then to Bristol, Tennessee, and then back to camp. So all those places, we used to just blast by at about 75 miles an hour. We're actually going to stop, get off our motorcycles, and visit these places. So it is to reflect back on the places that we have visited, to reflect back on the places that we've buzzed by. There's still a lot of riding left to do. And this thing is again, it's gone for 28 years, and hopefully it'll go for another 20 or 30 years.
And it's also a milestone year for Victory Junction.
Yes.
20th anniversary of that, just since its opening. And how rewarding is it to hit a milestone like that and just continue to see it grow like it has?
It feels like yesterday. Honestly, Adam's accident was 24 years ago this year. And that always feels like yesterday. But the camp, we came up with the idea. Everybody just threw everything they could at it. It was such a passion project that time just flew. And these first 20 years have flown. We've seen over 120,000 kids, either at the camp or through our programs that we take to hospitals. And that just blows me away. That blows me away. And I will say it till forever and ever, as long as I talk about camp. We lost a son and raised our hand and said, this is what we're going to do. And the first people there were Dale Jarrett and Bobby Labonte, and then comes Tony Stewart and Kenny Schrader and guys like that. And to this day, whether it's William Byron or Kyle Larson or those guys, they still, camp's still an important part of what goes on in NASCAR, and the fans continue to support and send kids to camp. So I am blown away that has grown the way it has. I am fascinated that it's 20 years has gone so fast, but I'm very, very humbled with the amount of people who have adopted Victory Junction, and I'm humbled by the kids that come through there and allow me to be a part of their life.
And it's so unique because it's such a rarity in sports to have something like that, to have that community. Obviously, there's community in every sport, but to have that and to have it continue to go strong, and the fact that kids can go there for free and have just all the blast in the world. I mean, what are some of the reactions you've gotten from maybe parents or something that just kind of still sticks with you?
The one thing is, when we first started, And they brought that first group of kids that first week, man, we were scared to death, dude. It's like, now what are we going to do? We got kids at camp. You know what I mean? It was okay when it was the buildings and when you were going through that process because it was a dream. But then when that dream comes true, it's that old saying, be careful what you dream of, or be careful what you wish for. Because when it happened, then you've got to make it happen. And so many parents. It's not, we did not want to be a financial burden on the parents. So many of these kids, their medical expenses, their medicine expense, their doctor visits are so astronomical and so burdening to a family. That's not what camp's supposed to be. Camp's not supposed to be a burden for anybody. It's supposed to be a blessing to not only the child that comes, but to the family that comes. And I think that's been the biggest reaction, is that it's free to all these kids that come. We've seen kids from 50 states and from 5 or 6 different foreign countries that kids have come to camp. So it's fascinating, the reach and the breadth and the touch that camp has had. But I think the one thing that all parents, no matter what your socioeconomics are, no matter where you fall on that social scale or that economic scale, to be able to have a place to be able to, for your child to go to camp and just be empowered and have that opportunity to just be a kid for a short period of time. Every parent wants that, whether your child is healthy or not. And we are very, very, again, just very blessed to be able to provide a service to some of these families.
Yes, it's been phenomenal to see it grow for how many, 20 years now. And, it's just, really, really excited to see, next 20 years where it continues
Yeah.
to go. But, obviously it's also, you got a whole lot of milestones coming on here. Also 75th, anniversary of the Petty family in racing. Obviously you're a huge part of that. Just, I mean, when you hear 75 years for something like that with your family and all, what comes to mind for you?
That I'm old. That's what I tell people. But honestly, it's fascinating, or it's amazing to me. NASCAR was formed in 1948, and incorporated, and they ran the first race in 49. So obviously my grandfather ran that first race, and we've been knocking around the racetrack, ever since, with my dad, with myself, with Adam, and first off, as I said, with my grandfather. But, it is amazing. The Wood brothers, another family who has been there for so long. The France family, who has been there since the very beginning. It's amazing that we're in a sport where you can have that collective of people who were there in the 40s and 50s, and who were there in the 60s and 70s, and who were there. It's funny. I tell people all the time, man, I started going to Riverside, and I was traveling with my dad in the summers when I was 6 or 7, back in 66, 67, 68. Saw Dan Gurney race, Parnelli Jones race, those guys run out at Riverside. Watched Pearson and the Allisons and the Bakers, and the Yarboroughs, and was here when Earnhardt showed up, was here when Jeff Gordon showed up, was here when Jimmy Johnson showed up. So it's funny when you look back on your life. Those people are just part of your life and part of your growing up and part of what you did. So 75 years is a long time in anything, no doubt about it. But we are honored to have been a part of the sport that long, and to have had an impact on the sport over those 75 years.
And yeah, obviously the Petty name has been synonymous, even in sports in general. Just what I've always kind of been intrigued about is, when you were growing up, you mentioned growing up within the sport, just getting into your career, getting into NASCAR itself. Just did you ever find it hard or pressuring maybe to kind of be your own person, be your own driver, with obviously the name that Lee Petty, Richard Petty, grandfather and
Yeah.
and your dad had, for how many years?
No, never did. And I've said this before. If it was possible for you to interview my granddad for 5 minutes and ask him 5 questions, interview my dad for 5 minutes and ask him, and do me for 5 minutes and ask me the same 5 questions, and ask Adam 5 minutes and ask him the same, you would leave that process and say those 4 guys don't even know each other. That's how different we just all were, just naturally. Not that anybody tried to be different. We just have different personalities and approach life different, and approach racing different. So, there was no pressure to be Lee Petty or to be Richard Petty, or for Adam to be Kyle Petty or to be Lee Petty or Richard Petty. There was just never any pressure there. We were just very fortunate that we all had a little bit of success, some more than others. My dad killed everybody, but That's what people say. It's like, man, people will when they're busting your chops, they're like, man, you didn't do anything like your dad did. And I'm like, yeah, nobody else did either. So what's your point? You know what I mean? There was nobody else that came along that won 200 races and 7 championships and 27 in a season and 10 in a row and all the poles and all the top tens and all the top fives. It's just not going to happen. That's rare air, man. So no, there was never any pressure there.
Yeah, it's always good to feel those, yeah, 200 wins, ain't no one gonna top that. And you kind of when I was looking back at, career for you and everything, what comes to mind is the SABCO days and just
Yeah.
with Felix Sabates and those guys and just I mean what stuck out to me just I mean obviously running the mellow yellow number 42, everyone knows that car and just I mean, what was it maybe just about that team that kind of clicked and where you're able to find the most success?
So I think there's a couple of things. I think if you break, it's tough to break down sometimes what I did because I was just all over the board. But Petty Enterprises had really fallen on harder times when I started. But my dad left. He won his 200th race somewhere else. You know what I mean? So that was so he and so we were just trying to maintain and build something at Petty Enterprises back in the early '80s. I went to drive for the Wood Brothers, and I drove for them for 4 years. They had never run all the races when I went to drive for them. So we spent the first couple of years building the team where we could run all the races and had some success. Then I went to drive for Felix, and he didn't have a team. That first year we run 15 or 16 races. So I spent the next few years building that team, working with that team build. And I was there the longest period of time, and there's where I had my most success. When I left Felix, I started my own team. And then ran that for a couple of years and then came back to Petty Enterprises and started a multi-car team. So if you look at my career, I've started about 6 or 7 teams. If you want to start a team, call me. I know all the ins and outs and all the ups and downs of starting a team, but I never stayed anywhere for any length of time to establish that except with Felix and except at SABCO. And that's where I won races. So, if I had stayed longer, if I had been more focused while I was there, I would have probably won more races. But man, I had a good time. Listen, I wouldn't change anything about my career. I won 8 races. I won some poles. I finished second to a lot of great race car drivers. I got to race in a time when the sport was really good. So I hear a lot of guys and they're like, man, if I'd have done this or if I'd have done that, forget that. It's not if. I was very fortunate to do, and that's all I care about.
Well, one thing I found was really unique when I was going through like the Sabatis years and everything. I mean, during that time, you had a couple beat down type of victories there. What comes to mind is Rockingham three in
Yeah.
a row, 90, 91, 92. I mean, you lapped all but yourself and one other driver in each of those races. I mean, I mean, what's the odds of that, number one? But just how in the
Yeah.
world did that happen?
You know what? And we talk about it all the time. Mark Martin and I have talked about it on numerous occasions. Matt Kenseth and I have talked about it. Some racetracks just match your style, man. No matter who you are. You look at Richard Petty at Daytona winning 7 Daytona 500s. Just matches the way he drives, man. That style of driving at that point in time. During those years, maybe not now, but during those years. And that's kind of the way the early '90s were for me at Rockingham and at Dover. At a mile and a half racetrack, I had good runs. Not so much on the short tracks and not so much on the bigger tracks. Also, although I won on a 2.5 mile racetrack and won at a road course and won other places, it was just that kind of place just kind of matched up with what we did, and we knew confidence builds a lot. When you go there and when you win a race one time at a place, man, you always feel like you can go back and run good.
And with that, I mean, do you guys just have something that just, that you had built on? You mentioned confidence, but just, I'm sure there was something with the car too that you knew going in that, this is going to be pretty close to not being able to match.
The funny part was I only remember if you go back and you talk to Robin or you talk to Gary, because Gary Nelson was a crew chief and then Robin Pemberton was a crew chief. I don't think we ever took the same car there twice. I think we took different cars all the time, and people would just look at us like we had 3 heads because we were bringing different cars. But with Robin and with Gary, man, they were the ones that won Rockingham. I was just the one that was fortunate to hang on to the steering wheel because that was a place, and Dover was a place. Charlotte was a place that we ran pretty good. Those places were places that they knew what they were doing, and all I had to do was do what they said do.
And you mentioned Charlotte. Obviously next month the All-Star race. You can't talk about the All-Star race without 92. One hot night with you and Davey Allison.
Yeah.
Obviously Earnhardt, they turned 3 or 4 or something like that. But looking back on that race specifically, I, it seems like that race only gains more prestige as the years go on. Why do you feel that is?
Because, so I have no idea. I think the one thing, and the one thing that's always lost is, that was the first night race at Charlotte. And people did not believe they could light a mile-and-a-half racetrack. And once we practiced, we were like, yeah, man, this place is phenomenal. Musco Lighting and those guys did a phenomenal job. But I just think so many people came out not knowing what they were going to see from a fan base. And what they saw was something they've never seen again, and an all-star race where you have, you have the leader going into three, he spins around, the leader coming off the four runs second, and the guy that wins the race crashes right past the start finish line. So, I mean, it was one hot night. And I mean, everything happened, and everything since then has been compared to that. I listen. I don't know why. It was just a regular race. But it just ended up being crazy that night. And I think the mystique of being under the lights for the first time, by it being Dale Earnhardt, who's no longer here, by it being Davey Allison, who's no longer here, how people view that race, it just continues to grow.
And final few questions. Obviously, since retired, you've been all over media, social media, whatever it may be, for good or bad. But specifically with TV and everything, um, just since retired, I mean, just what is it about that side of being kind of on just a different side, but also being able to kind of voice your opinion to just be able to inform people? What do you enjoy about being able to do that?
So, honestly, I enjoy arguing. To be totally honest with you, because I think so. We said it earlier. I've just been around the sport my whole life. So when something happens, I've probably seen it at some point in time, and that just says I'm old. But I've probably seen it happen before. It's so funny during the truck race at Texas, a rear end housing came out from under a truck there at Coda, and everybody was like, "Man, I've never seen that before." I can't tell you how many times I've seen it. You know what I mean? It used to happen all the time when we didn't have as good of parts. Now that we have the parts and pieces we have today, it's an oddity. It's rare. But I've seen them break. I've seen trailer arms break, cross members break. But I think the thing is that when you ask me a question about something that goes on at the racetrack, or when I see somebody do something, the and I'm not saying this is right or wrong. I'm not. But my breadth of experience and history goes back to the late 60s, not to 1998, not to 2005. I'm not giving you opinion on what I've seen over the last 15 years. I'm giving you opinion on what I've seen over the last 45 years. It's funny. I don't even know I'm doing it sometimes. So I like arguing with people that think they're experts after 6 years of watching the sport from their couch, and never doing anything else, but listening to radio and watching it on TV, and they're all geniuses. So I love to argue with people like that, because honestly, they can't hang. And that's why Twitter is so much fun, just going back at people. But being on this side is totally different. Totally different. I respect what drivers and crews and teams do, but in this day and time, I respect it more probably than I ever have in the sport, because the pressure they're under to perform, the things they have to do. I talk to Joey all the time, talk to Brad, talk to other guys, and it fascinates me what it takes to be a NASCAR race car driver in this given time, or what it takes to be a crew chief or a team owner, whatever. It's a different time in the sport.
And just a random side note, as a kid, I remember, oh, here goes Kyle Petty, here he goes again. But now as you grow older, you're like, man, it's interesting. The shift. Obviously, kids don't really know as
Yeah.
much as but it's just interesting because now I'm like, I want to hear that opinion. I want to hear because yeah, like you said, all the way back to the '60s, it's like you can't get that anywhere else for the most part. And I think that's just I think it's commendable as well.
Yeah. Listen, I don't know about that, but it's not going to stop me one way or the other.
regardless.
I tell you, it's so funny. Kevin Harvick and I were together this past weekend, and we were talking about the same thing. Is two things. You got to be who you are. If you're on TV, if you're doing what you're doing right here, you just got to be you, man. You can't fake it. And we've educated the fans so much. And I talk about arguing with them, but we've educated them so much to the technical side of the sport and what we are telling them they're seeing, that they're smart. They're not idiots. You can't BS them. You can't blind, you got to be upfront with them. And if you're not upfront with them, even when it's their favorite driver, they don't want to hear it. But if you're not upfront with them, then they lose respect for you. And if you don't believe what you're saying, they're going to lose respect for you. So, I mean, listen, I've teed off a lot of drivers in my time, from behind the wheel and from behind the microphone. I can say that. But at the same time, it's just a game, dude. It's just a game. We're just riding around in circles. We're not curing cancer. We're not changing the world. We're not doing any of that. And it's fun. And it's fun in games, but people do get their feelings hurt. And, sometimes you're supposed to dance around it, where most of the time I just dance on top of it. And that's kind of the way it is.
I feel like that's the only way to go. And final question, just I see all the guitars in the background.
Yeah.
And I had the opportunity to go to the Grand Ole Opry last summer. Really super cool experience. It's something everyone's got to go at some point. And you've had the opportunity
sure.
with it twice to,
Yep.
not compete, but just to perform out there. That's a huge deal. I mean, that place has had everything, everyone out there. Just for you, I mean, how has music been such a really positive outlet for you over the years?
So, music's always been a part. I've always played music. I played guitar since I was 12, played in a high school band. I was in a marching band, man. I was a band geek. So I love band. And it's funny because people make fun of me to this day because I played the saxophone in band. But it's just, it's always been a relief, an outlet, a therapist. A guitar is a great therapist. Music is a great therapist. And, after Adam's accident in 2000, it just became something I leaned on really heavy to play, and started writing more and singing more. And I've had the opportunity to do the Opry twice, and to walk out in the center of the stage at the Opry with the house like that. I mean, it's you feel the ghost. You feel the people that have come before you, just like I do when I roll into Daytona every year. Every year, that's my sacred place. That's our hallowed ground. As a NASCAR driver, as a stock car driver. And even when I went to Indy for the first time, and we went up there to tire test back in the 90s, I felt that. I felt all the guys who had run at Indy. And you feel that when you walk into Augusta National for the Masters. You feel all the guys that came before. There's just certain places in sports where you feel it. And there's certain places, I'm sure Carnegie Hall and places like that are the same way, for artists and for people. So to have an opportunity to be able to play a song I wrote, and be able to put your art out there and be able to walk out there and do it, that was pretty cool. That ranks way up there as one of the coolest things I've ever done.
Well, hopefully I'll be able to see you perform live at some point. That'd be really cool. But
Cool,
Kyle,
man.
I appreciate you taking the time. Have fun, continuing what you're doing. Enjoy the charity ride coming up here, and yeah, thanks for taking the time.
Thank you, man. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching episode 58 with special guest Kyle Petty. Now, it's still crazy to me that Kyle's charity ride is heading towards its 28th year. I mean, it's just been really cool just to see the impact he's had, just the ride has had on so many people, and Victory Junction as well. I mean, it'd certainly be super, super cool to go out and trek with them one of these years. I'd have to get a motorcycle first, but I mean, hey, it's essentially riding a bike, right? You guys let me know how that is. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Make sure to like, subscribe, and comment below what you thought of today's show. We appreciate your feedback and excitement for just the show, all the drivers we have on, so fire away in the comments. Make sure to also follow this podcast on X, not Twitter, and Instagram at Behind Catch as well. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great weekend. Enjoy some racing, and I'll catch you guys later.